Good evening. There's still quite a few seats down front, so please feel free to come in and take a seat. We'll get started. Great. All right. Well, I'm Lisa Sutcliffe. I'm a curator in the Department of Photographs here at the Met and curator of the exhibition Jesse Krimes Corrections. Thank you all for joining us tonight for what we know will be an insightful conversation with the artist about his impactful work. Jesse Krimes Corrections is on view in the Joyce and Robert Menschel Hall for Modern Photography, or Gallery 851, through July 13th, and I hope you will have a chance to see it if you haven't already. We are grateful to Joyce Frank Menschel for her support of this exhibition and of our department. For Corrections, we invited Jesse to consider his work in conversation with the methodological practice of Alphonse Bertillon, a French criminologist who developed the first modern system of police identification before the adoption of fingerprinting. The exhibition presents one artist's response to a system implemented by the state to discipline and control populations, suggesting the ways in which images can dehumanize their subjects and construct damaging narratives. Over the course of his 6-year incarceration, Krimes made monumental installations that reflect the ingenuity and resilience of an artist working without access to traditional materials. Employing newspapers, soap, cotton sheets, playing cards, and hair gel, he created artworks that recontextualize photographs circulating in the media, prompting questions about which members of society hold power and who is valued. Born and raised in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, Krimes was involved in the criminal justice system from a young age. He studied art as an undergraduate at Millersville University of Pennsylvania and was indicted by the U.S. government on drug charges not long after his 2008 graduation. To pass the time in isolation, he transformed commonplace items into components for an installation that responds to the photographic mugshot. Purgatory highlights how power circulates in images and the hierarchies of social imbalance created and reinscribed by our systems of identification. The modern-day mugshot derives from a 19th-century system developed by Alphonse Bertillon, an officer in the Paris Prefecture of Police, to target and identify people charged with crimes. Bertillon's unique system implemented a pioneering technique called Bertillonage that used 11 anthropomorphic measurements from the length of the head to that of the left foot to transform the body into a set of measurable data points. This documentation, paired with notes on distinguishing features and standardized frontal and profile photographs, was compiled to identify recidivists. As the method was adopted worldwide in the 1890s, police invited the public to play a role in surveillance by publishing the photographs. Incarceration fueled Krimes' drive to examine the systems of power in our society while also forging collaborative relationships and providing the ordinary materials he has used to critique it. Since his release from prison, Krimes has sought to make work that cultivates dialogue to challenge and change existing narratives around incarceration. I'm looking forward to hearing from Jesse and discussing his work in Corrections more in depth this evening, and now it is my great honor to introduce Jesse Krimes. Oh, wait. Let me just tell you a little bit about Jesse before he comes up on stage. So Jesse is a Philadelphia-based artist, curator, and advocate whose work explores how contemporary media shapes and reinforces societal mechanisms of power and control, with a particular focus on criminal and racial justice. Krimes' work has been exhibited at venues including PS1, the Palais de Tokyo, the Philadelphia Museum of Art, and the Zimmerli Museum. After his release, he founded the Center for Art and Advocacy, the first and only national fellowship dedicated to supporting formerly incarcerated artists, where he currently serves as executive director. Please join me in welcoming Jesse Krimes.
Well, thank you, Lisa, for that introduction. How's everyone doing? It's a beautiful day. And it's an absolute honor to be here with all of you today at this institution, which literally holds centuries of human creativity and imagination. It's a space that is built to preserve and to challenge and reflect our culture, our shared culture. And I think it's important to note that as we gather here tonight, this important aspect that both prisons and museums developed almost side by side over the course of time. And both of those systems were designed to shape society. One of them is designed to show what we value by hanging it on the walls. And the other is designed to show or place people that we deem disposable behind those same walls. And so as an artist who has honestly been disappeared for a majority of my life from public view, I fully understand the full weight of what it means to be seen and to be hanging in these halls. And so Lisa touched on this a little bit, but since the age of 13, I've pretty much been under some form of carceral control, from juvenile probation and jail to state and federal prison. And not once during that long journey did anyone ever ask me what I aspired to be. And so I began asking those questions myself during my 6-year federal prison sentence, the first year of which I spent in solitary confinement because I wouldn't cooperate and tell on other people. And so when I began asking those questions, I very quickly realized that, they could pretty much take everything from me. Every societal marker that forms your sense of identity could be taken. But the one thing that they couldn't take from me was my ability to create and imagine. And so I started to imagine something different. And actually, I started to reflect back on my life and how, for most of it, I had actually bought into this idea that I was a criminal because it had been reinforced within me over all of my interactions with police. And so in that moment in my solitary cell, when I'm doing this deep soul searching, and realizing that the one thing that couldn't be taken from me was my ability to create, I recognized that I'm actually an artist. And I think that's a really important shift because it just helped sustain me, and it really gave me a direction for the rest of my time when I was incarcerated, where I made an intentional decision that I was going to utilize every minute and every hour and every day of my 6-year sentence to produce something visible, something productive in the world from this system that is designed to erase me. And so that act in itself is quite revolutionary. And when I was in solitary, I didn't have access to a lot of materials. And so I started working with the limited materials I had. And I recognized that, I'm very much a material artist. So I recognized the latent language that is invested in prison-issued soap. It's this material that is ephemeral. It's very delicate. It has this whole language that kind of connects to the idea of the penitentiary itself, which originates from the word repentance. And so thinking about soap and purification and cleansing and what the prison system is purportedly supposed to do for individuals, it became this medium that I could use to have these kind of broader conversations. And so I began transferring mugshots out of the newspaper onto the surface of the soap. And that was kind of important to me because I was also thinking about, when I was in college before, I had read Foucault's Discipline and Punish. So I had understood the development from corporal bodily punishment, where they used to force people in the community to come out to the town square and basically watch a beheading. And I recognize that we no longer do that today, but we still do a practice that's somewhat similar through the media. And so for me, that's what the mugshot represented. There were these little decapitated heads depicting an individual, most likely from the worst point in their life, and they formed this narrative around that individual and talking about their crimes as if that is the only thing that makes up their entire humanity. And those things then go out into the world and they form our social value systems and who we deem disposable and who we deem to have value. And so by transferring the mugshots onto the surface of the soap, it was a way to kind of decontextualize those narratives and reformat them into this new artwork that could have very different conversations. And so over the time that I was making these in solitary, I also recognized that I needed to figure out a way to get them out of my prison cell. Because again, you can't just like give these to the guard and they put it in the mail and send it out for you. And so I noticed that the same way that I was kind of making artwork, a lot of the other guys in the prison were playing cards. Specifically, they were playing poker. And I found that to be really interesting because the way that I was creating artwork to kind of disconnect from this environment, they were playing this game. But if you think about the game of poker, it's all based off of visibility. It's based off of being able to read people's body language and tells and if they're bluffing or not. And because we were in solitary and the way that people played, you couldn't actually see the other people you were playing with. And so I found that really interesting, where this game based on deceit and bluffing turned into one of trust. And so I started collecting the used playing cards and cutting and basically altering the faces of the kings, jacks, and queens as a way to create these little containers. And I would basically put the soap in them and mail them out 2 by 2 over a period of a year. And so over time, this piece consisted of over 292 individual playing card decks with mugshots. And it's also important to say that in the process of making this, I also began to incorporate portraits of other people who weren't necessarily accused of crimes, but I was doing that as a way to kind of complicate this notion of who we view as an offender. And that felt really important to do within this context, as well as altering the suits of the cards, kind of as a way to destabilize this system, this thing that is designed for the game to function, but showing how it can function in another way when you alter it. And as Lisa had mentioned, we thought it was really important to pair these with Bertillon's mugshots because in many ways, it showcases how photography and mugshots in particular have always been weaponized since their founding against people that the state deems to be threats. And so after I completed the year in solitary confinement, I was eventually transferred to a federal prison and in general population. And so it was there when I got a little bit more access to some other materials. And I began transferring images out of the New York Times onto the surface of prison bed sheets. And I did that using hair gel and a spoon, which was kind of weird at the time because I also didn't have any hair. And so I was going up to the commissary and buying boatloads of hair gel, and they were looking at me like I was crazy. I even enlisted my friend Jared, who is also bald and here tonight, to buy hair gel, and he was also getting those same insane looks. But we do anything for the sake of art. And so anyway, I began kind of transferring these images and blending them together to kind of create this surrealist landscape. And over time, I worked on that piece for about a period of 3 years, basically working 12 hours a day. There are thousands of image transfers on this work, and I had to smuggle it out piece by piece without ever seeing it entirely compiled together until I came home. And it ended up measuring 15 feet tall and 40 feet long. And, there's all sorts of things within this landscape. But if you think about this in relation to Purgatory, the work that I was making, that was really about trying to capture the dignity of the people who are enmeshed in the criminal justice system. And this piece is more about kind of zooming out and focusing on all of the things in society that actually feed into and support and sustain the mass erasure of people. So this is about capturing the systems and structures out in the world that actually allow mass incarceration to exist. And so there's a lot of things invested in this work that touch on our value systems, and you can kind of see that in the hierarchy of how the figures in this piece are the largest thing that kind of tower over the landscape, and those are all commercial advertisements, right? And so that is something that we clearly value through the use of visual language and scale, where all of the other imagery of, natural disasters and man-made disasters and political disasters and all of the things happening all over the world get a much smaller footprint in print, right? But most of us are trained how to read text, but most of us are not trained how to read visual language. And so this visual language, which is being circulated in newspapers and prints and magazines, has just as much impact on us in forming our value systems of what we deem, again, valuable versus what we deem disposable. It's just a lot of people aren't trained to read that visual language. And so this piece basically removes all of the text and captures everything that happened in the world from 2010 to 2013. And because we were composing this exhibition, and at the time that I was talking to Lisa about putting the show together, it was actually the 10-year mark from when I had been released from federal prison. And I wanted to create a new piece that was in conversation with Apocalyptine and Purgatory. And so for that piece, I reached back out to friends of mine who are still incarcerated. Many of them are serving life sentences. And I used this quote from Carl Jung, which was basically like, you can go out into the riverbed, collect all of the pebbles, and weigh them, and find the average weight. But if you go back out into that same riverbed and pick up a pebble, you may never find one that actually weighs that weight. And I thought it was this beautiful encapsulation of how systems don't take into account the uniqueness of individuals and their humanity. And so I paid them as collaborators to participate in this project, and I asked them to go out into the prison yard and find the ideal pebble that represents them. And after I received that pebble, I I didn't hand wrap all of them. I had about 6 assistants who were helping me on this for a period of a year. But they're all hand wrapped in thread, and then the threads that suspend each pebble have image transfers of Apocalyptine over the single strands of thread. And so it served as a way to kind of deconstruct Apocalyptine, which was made inside, and show what we're actually talking about at its core is the value of human dignity in life that is currently behind bars. And so it's still visible, but it's very subtle. And it's this thing that just suspends that singular pebble. And so the other thing that I wanted to kind of talk about is that my story and my experience is also not unique, right? There are literally thousands of brilliant, creative individuals that are currently behind bars or have since come home. And so when I came home in 2014, both me and my friend Russell Craig, who's another formerly incarcerated artist, started a fellowship program where we fund formerly incarcerated creatives across the country. We give them $20,000 grants. We connect them to industry experts and teach them about practice sustainability. And we've done that over the last 7 years. And to date, we have 42 fellows that we've supported. And often we are the very first funder of our artists. And I say that because since receiving funding, many of these artists, with just a little bit of support and a little bit of someone being like, what are you interested in? How can we help build your practice and your career? They thrived, right? They built incredible careers and had solo shows at the Brooklyn Museum, got MacArthur Genius Awards, Pulitzer Prizes, Creative Capital grants, Guggenheim fellowships. And again, it's like, I think this really speaks to the punitive ideology that exists within our society and how we treat pretty much every social crisis that we come across, when all it really takes is for someone to say, hey, I don't care how you messed up. What are you actually good at? What are you interested in? And how do we actually help you thrive in the world? And it's just radically transformative for people. And I'll say that of all the 42 artists that we've funded, not a single person has went back to jail or prison. I think that's quite rare as a recidivism rate for most organizations. And so the fellowship existed for the last 7 years, but in 2022, we formed into the Center for Art and Advocacy. And what that basically allowed us to do with some new significant funding is build out other facets of our program to support artists. And so in addition to keeping the fellowship and funding artists every year, we also have an academy program that we're building out to work with more emerging artists who are directly impacted. We have a residency program in the works that we're building in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, because again, many of our artists have literally lost decades of their life behind bars. And so how do we create the space and time for them to explore new mediums, collaborate with other artists? And the final facet, which we just opened in Bed-Stuy in New York a few weeks ago, it feels like it was months ago at this point, is a flagship gallery where we get to showcase our artists who are all over the country from every creative discipline. And like we've built the space to actually be a place where we give equal footing to visual artists and writers and filmmakers and performance artists. And so the space is designed in a very revolutionary kind of way so that all of these practices get treated as equal. And I will say, just as a note to end on, and I'm happy to kind of expand upon this during our conversation later when Lisa comes back up, but I think in this political moment, in this time when cultural institutions, when democracy is under threat, when carceral institutions are actually growing, I think there are a lot of really significant lessons to be learned from people who have lived not just 4 years under an oppressive regime, but sometimes 4 decades, right? And so there are incredible ways that artists not only survived during those times, they actually thrived. They built community, they used creative practice, they worked under extreme surveillance. The prison system is honestly the most punishing system that this country offers, right? It's where all of the social issues that we have all get filtered and punished through. And so when I talk about prison and mass incarceration, it's not just a single issue. It literally touches on everything from women's rights and incarceration to climate change, to race, to politics. Everything happening in the country gets filtered through our carceral system. And so I think in this moment, it's really important that we look to artists who have that lived experience because they offer invaluable insights into how we not just survive oppressive systems, but how we create alternative systems and structures and ways to thrive and build community in spite of them. And so with that, I would like to welcome Lisa back up so that we can continue in more of a conversation.
Thank you, Jesse. It's always wonderful to hear from an artist, but particularly from someone who brings the work to life, who is able to sort of bring all of your life experiences to the work and to help us understand sort of incarceration better. One of the things I thought would be interesting to talk about to begin is this idea of prisons and museums sort of coming out of the same moment in culture as institutions that assign value. This idea that what it means to determine value, whether it's a person or an image, that you're choosing to work with images and to help us kind of reconsider the images that surround us, whether it's in the newspaper, whether it's a mugshot. Can you talk a little bit about this idea of visual literacy and how you chose to start working with images when you were incarcerated? What led you to really sort of want to question this sense of how images have value?
I think that's a great question. Because prior to going into the prison system, when I was at Millersville University, I was actually studying sculpture. And so I was running the bronze foundry and making three-dimensional objects and works. And obviously, when you go into prison, that's frowned upon. And so I think I was forced to kind of reevaluate my practice. And in the process of that reevaluation, I kept coming across these mugshots and these images in the newspaper that just felt completely disjointed from reality, particularly the reality that was surrounding me in the moment. I mean, there were people who would come up, their mugshot would come up in the newspaper who I was living with, that I interact with daily. And it's talking about this person from this like singular point of view from this one event, which is in complete contrast to how I interact with this person on a day-to-day basis. And so that was the part that started really kind of gestating for me of thinking about images and how they occupy space in print, particularly. And it just became apparent that, like, in many ways, prison is just like a microcosm of society. And so I knew that if I started to kind of play with the images and alter them and transfer them, even the transfer process alone is inverting them. So just through that process, I'm already having the complete opposite conversation of what it was trying to have when it was in print. And I just found that really fascinating. And so I also recognized the power of images, of like, you know, how they basically formed my value systems and the way that I saw the world before I was incarcerated versus how I was experiencing them when I was inside. And so that was something that just felt important to start um, creating with, to basically explore those different value systems.
Yeah, to sort of make other people aware of what you were noticing in those images. And then I want to bring that back to the museum. So the sense of, you know, walking through a place like the Met and you see Hieronymus Bosch, you see, you know, altarpieces from the 15th and 16th century, and you're sort of drawing on that language too in creating Apocalyptine, so that you have this sort of grand scale historical painting narrative that's composed of all of these images. And now here is this work made on 39 bed sheets on the wall of the Met in the same building where Hieronymus Bosch is on view. And so visitors can sort of look at them not in the same room, but sort of thinking about them from the same perspective of this span of art history across time. And what does that mean for visitors to be able to think about your understanding of Hieronymus Bosch in prison, and then knowing where the work came from and what that means for visitors to experience here in this building?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, again, if you think about Bosch, he was basically painting and capturing all of the socio-political things as he saw them happening in real time. And for me, it was much like Dante's Divine Comedy, right? Where it's like he's creating this narrative to depict and use like living examples of people that are existing in his world. And so when you think about that historically, I think you can view that and it comes with some form of distance, right? And we're looking back on something that has happened. And I think the importance of a work like Apocalyptine is that many of the images and the things and the people that you see depicted in that work are still very much a part of our day-to-day life, right? And I mean, I remember transferring Donald Trump in the hell section of Apocalyptine, right? And this is like back in 2010. This is before he was running for president. But you see the mechanisms of like things that were put into place in the media long before to kind of build a public profile, to lay the groundwork for things in the future. And I say that because I think Apocalyptine, in many ways, same as with Bosch or Dante, they were trying to create a map or a mirror or something that, you know, or even a call to action, something that was basically highlighting things that needed to be addressed in different ways. And so it feels really important to have that here because, again, we're all living in this moment. And I think that that work offers a lot of things for us to consider in terms of how we're engaging in our day-to-day lives.
And I think one thing to note too with Apocalyptine, when you go up and see it in the gallery, since they were transferred, they are reversed. So you get this sense of Jesse looking through the media out to the outside world, and it kind of puts you, the viewer, in his perspective. And so I think that reversal sort of helps to sort of remind someone looking at the work of what your experience might have been like, even though you can never really know what that would be like personally. You get that sense of sort of being behind the glass instead of in front of it. Can you tell us a little bit about how artists were treated inside prison? What was the role of an artist in prison?
It's actually quite different from out here. And so I was kind of shocked when I went in at how much care and respect you received as an artist behind prison walls, which is drastically different, I think, for most artists out here, right? Unless we're talking about like the big established blue chip artists, but that's like less than 1% of 1% of the artists in the world. And it was just, I think there are a number of reasons for that. And it's because when you have everything stripped away from you, even your communications aren't free. So it's hard to stay in contact with your loved ones and your families. And as an artist, you're someone who is able to create something physical and tangible that they can mail to their son on his birthday. And that is such a powerful form of empathy and connection for people who are incarcerated. And so if you have the ability to create that and give that to someone else, that they can then show their love for their loved ones, like that just automatically places you in an entire different realm in there. It's so much so that like in the prison that I was in, the first one that I was in was a maximum security prison, and there was like no forming friendships across racial lines, right? And so as a white man, I was expected to be with all of the other white people. But in the process of doing portraits for people and tattoo designs and making artwork, I was able to have conversations across all of these different racial lines to the point where I never had to click up. I never had to join a gang. I was basically protected by all of the shot callers from every gang that exists within the prison. And again, that is a testament to the power of art, not just in what it can communicate and say out in the world, but how it can actually transcend boundaries and build real community. Like I formed real friendships with people in ways that other people within those confined conditions weren't able to.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting to me to see how collaboration is so central to your process. I mean, I think of you as someone who is sort of an obsessive maker, but even in that kind of obsessive solo making, even in solitary, you were sort of drawing materials from other people. You were involving other people in your, practice. You formed relationships. You formed an artist collective with Jared and with others when you were in prison. And now, there's the fellowship, there's the center, but there's also the Naxos piece where you're inviting others to participate by mailing you a stone so that they can be represented in your art. And you have quilts as well. I wonder if you can talk about this role of collaboration and how you involve other people in your practice, perhaps then and also since you left prison.
Yeah, I think at its core, I mean, I love being an artist. I love making. I'm often, in many ways, like a solitary maker. But at the same time, I recognize what we're up against. And I don't think it's possible to have gone through that system and not understood that the most radical thing that you could do is form community. And I think that just really stuck with me. Like, I wouldn't have been able to make Apocalyptine without Jared or Gilberto. I wouldn't have been able to do half the things that I did without the other people who were in there. And so recognizing the power of community, I think, is something that is just kind of integral to my practice at this point. And I also think it's something that is particular to people who are incarcerated, right? Like, you recognize very quickly that just community and making and forming bonds and relationships is the thing that's going to help you survive that environment. And I think that's just as true out here. And so it's just always something that no matter what project I'm working on, no matter what I'm thinking about, I think about how I can involve other people or how I can have conversations about the broader system. And so I often go back and forth between focusing on the system writ large and then focusing on ways to help and support individual people who are impacted by incarceration. Because for me, those are like, it's a dual approach to one problem, basically.
So, one of the reasons I was interested in photography to begin with was because of social reform, and so many of the photographers who considered the camera as a sort of way to bear witness. And so you are not a photographer, you sort of, you're here, you work with images, but I wonder if you can talk about what you see as the role of art and artists in society. Like, what is there a way now to use art to influence prison reform? Is there a way to use art to change people's minds about what can be seen as very political issues?
Absolutely. And I think kind of back to the earlier conversation about how artists are treated in society, it's like artists are such a core part of our culture. I mean, they really capture the stories and change perspectives and do things from a different lens. And if you think about, again, kind of like this cultural moment that we're in, where it's like words are being banned. You can't say the word woman or history or, whatever they're making up. But it's like the power of artists is that they could they could create an entire poem all about women and never say the word once, right? They could make an image about any issue and never mention any word. And it's that like nimbleness, that creativity that I think just has a lot of lessons for people to kind of learn when, again, we're in this moment where the things that are happening under a carceral system are beginning to happen out here, right? Or they've always happened out here, but they're beginning to be amplified. And so, like, again, I think of like an artist like Gary Tyler, who served over 4 decades on death row in Angola prison and was arrested when he was 16 years old and wrongfully accused of this crime. And he found ways to not only survive this experience on death row for 4 decades, he found ways to thrive. And he did that through building community, through not waiting for permission to start making work to hold on to his humanity. He did it immediately. And I think some of the other things that are really important for artists, or why they're important, is that, even under extreme surveillance, you find ways to adapt. You find ways to create whatever you need to create, to say whatever you need to say. I think there are ways they are innovative. It's just like there are so many lessons that are yet to kind of be learned that are applicable today. And I think that when we start supporting people who have that lived experience, you will actually start to begin to see change of that system. Because in the transformation of individuals who have that lived experience, they begin to then transform the systems through the creation of whatever it is they're making. And so I think that's also like the power of the Center for Art and Advocacy, is like we're funding artists across the country, right? It's not just one artist in one place. These are artists all over the country who then have a practice that begins to thrive. They begin to build their own communities. They have their own conversations, their own shows and exhibitions. And it just really helps change the cultural narrative, because in this moment, we really need to control the narrative. And the way that you do that is through art and artists.
Yeah, Jesse, I want to just put a point on that because I think one of the reasons I love working in a museum is that it really does offer a platform for conversations that might be too difficult to have elsewhere. That it's about a sort of personal expression, and the ideas can be more abstract. And yet, at the same time, these are people's lives. And so I think it's important for there to be some porosity between people who might not be used to coming to museums or to understanding that they can have a role in the arts, and how to sort of bring us closer together through that. And I think that what you're doing at the center is a really great example of that. And I'd love for you to share a little bit more with our audience about where the center is, how can they find out more about it? You know, is there a way for them to get involved? What can they do to be advocates as well?
Yeah, so anyone who is interested, our new gallery space is at 22 Bancroft Place in Bed-Stuy. Again, we opened with a show featuring 35 of our artists, and it's multidisciplinary, so there are writers and poets and filmmakers, and we'll be doing programming over the coming months. It's open until September 20th. So I definitely encourage you to come out and visit the space and see their works. And then I think that other ways that you can get connected is to, reach out to me, or our deputy director, Carly Fisher, is here. She's amazing. And we are very eager to partner with people. Because again, it's not just how artists create community when they're inside. We're trying to do that and replicate that out here. And so we're very interested in partnerships, partnering with other institutions. We're building out a curriculum that institutions can take on and work with people in proximity to where they are based, so they can work with people who are directly impacted in their communities. And so there are a number of ways to get involved. But I would definitely say visit our new website, which is amazing. It's just the centerforartandadvocacy.org. And there, our contact information is on there, and would be happy to hear from you.
Great. Well, I also want to mention that we have a program coming up with one of your fellows in June, and that will be on our website if anyone's interested in coming back for that. But that's the kind of sort of collaboration we're hoping to do more of here. And I do want to make sure that we have time for audience questions tonight. So perhaps if any of you have a question, I don't know if there's a microphone or I can bring it to you. Okay.
Thank you. Jesse, you spoke in the very beginning about how the carceral system can take so many things away from you, but the one thing they can't take is your creativity. As someone who was incarcerated for 7 years and taught himself how to paint during that time, I still think about the difficulties that existed in trying to create. There were some physical obstacles because, with the officers who were on the wing, and then other obstacles about trying to get materials, whether you had an art program that allowed you materials. Could you talk a little bit about the obstacles that you faced? Because I'm pretty sure they didn't appreciate you taking those bed sheets and repurposing them. So if you could just talk a little bit about that, I appreciate it.
Of course. And I actually love to hear that you learned how to paint while you were in there. Because again, I think it's yes, you can look at being incarcerated as this barrier or this obstacle, but you can also look at it as this opportunity to be innovative, right? And so for me, so much of my practice is I try to always look at something that is viewed maybe in a negative and find the positive. And that was what I did. And it was different through different points in time, because when I was in solitary confinement, obviously I had like no access. I was locked down 23 and a half hours a day. And so my material choices were very limited to soap and newspaper, prison bed sheets, and just a single #2 pencil. But even that is like, how do you use that, and how do you use that environment to be innovative, right? How do you find solutions to this problem?
Yeah, because I'm pretty sure that a lot of people would have those materials and not make what you made with them.
Well, it helps that I had amazing professors when I went to school. And that was the thing, is like I came in equipped with the ability to think critically, and I understood visual language, and it was like someone or multiple people invested time and energy into helping me see that, right? Which is also why, like, what we're trying to do with the center. And so, created that work while I was in there, and yeah, had to like dodge the guards, and I couldn't just mail them out, so I made friends with the trustee who was cleaning the block, and I would draw portraits of his kids for their birthdays, and he would basically slip my sealed envelopes in his waistband, and when he went out into the hallway to get the cleaning supplies, he would drop them in the mail slot. And that's how I avoided having to give an open envelope to the guard, because he would have confiscated everything. But again, I think there are ways to get around pretty much anything. I'm the master of finding loopholes. I think that is true of my life. But even with like the prison bed sheets, and this is something I didn't talk about when I was speaking, which I should have mentioned, is that those bed sheets are produced in a program called Unicore, which has massive factories all over the country. And so people are working in these factories, and they're making not just prison bed sheets, but like Kevlar helmets and vests and desks and solar panels. And so there are these like massive hidden workforces that, if you think about it, like slavery did not end. It just transformed into our current carceral system, where people are paid 40 cents to $1 something an hour to make all of these products for the government. And like it also incentivizes judges to sentence people to prisons for longer, because you have this confined workforce that you can have access to make literally anything for nothing. And so, sorry, that's a bit of a tangent, but it pisses me off. And so again, I was like using those bed sheets and tearing them, which would have been considered contraband. They would have put me in solitary confinement for doing that. But the risk of doing that and making that work was worth it to me, because now when it's hanging out here, I get to have these conversations about where those sheets are made. That materiality is very important. And yeah, I had to form friendships and find ways to get it out of the prison. But when you have the drive and vision to create, you find ways no matter what.
Question.
Hi, my name is Fidan. Thank you so much. This is a great talk. And a couple of weeks ago, someone in my school mentioned your name, and that's how I become familiar. First of all, I think what you're doing is very applaudable and meaningful. And my question is, do you ever wonder that if you never went to prison, would your career take off the same way? Would you get this much satisfaction? And I think it's amazing. Like, I would die for that, to find my purpose now. I think you find it, and it's great. But do you ever wonder that if you didn't go, this didn't happen to you, would you find your purpose, or would you be satisfied what you're doing?
That's a great question. I think I was cursed upon birth with the name Krimes. And so I had to contend with that from a very early age. But I mean, it's a complicated question, so it's kind of a complicated answer in that, again, since the age of 13, I've had so many interactions with the police and the justice system, or the legal system, as we should call it. And so I would like to believe that, the work that I was making, even as an undergrad, was exploring all of these issues, just in different materials. And I don't know that even if my practice had continued exploring these ideas and creating work around the carceral system, if I hadn't actually gone to prison the last time when I created Apocalyptine and Purgatory, if when I came home I would have gotten this kind of attention and platform. And so,
What about the sort of marking time aspect of your work that, like, I think both with Purgatory and Apocalyptine, there is this sense that, you know, what you had was time and you wanted to make it feel meaningful. And of course, your art is made up of who you are. And so if you'd had different experiences, you would have made different work. But I wonder if there is some aspect of sort of trying to make that time feel meaningful that really fueled you.
yeah, I mean, I think it definitely fueled me to be incredibly productive. Um, but even that said, I think like I was incredibly productive even before. And so like the show that I had made prior to getting indicted was like hundreds of bronze flowers and copper sculptures, and then I like positioned live plants under grow lights and restricted them with jewelry connective devices so that they had to overcome their restrictions to get to this light. And I placed those hundreds of bronze flowers and copper ones under a natural skylight where they couldn't possibly benefit from that environment. And it's like, I think I've always just been obsessive.
I believe that.
But there was a particular fire that I think ignited when I was inside. And that was not just my own personal experience and what happened to me, but what I was seeing happen to other people. And there was no way that I could go through that system and not create. Well, I felt like I had to create work that was large enough to get people's attention. Like I had to create hundreds of things. I had to create 39 bed sheets that are 15 feet tall and 40 feet long as a way to try to capture even just a fraction of the issue that we're talking about. And so I think in that sense, it definitely created that environment which allowed me to focus all of my time and attention on it.
Another question down here.
Thank you. Your story is really amazing. I have two questions, if I remember my second one. But the first one is you talked about the collaboration and really the reliance on other people who are incarcerated with you and that you continue to work with them. Were there people also, you said you were mailing your pieces out, and you had a conception of something that it would receive that it would have an audience. Were there people on the outside during the 6 years that you were serving time that were encouraging you or showing your work? That's one question. And then the second one is, now that you are no longer incarcerated, you said you have a background in sculpture. I saw another exhibit at a gallery in New York that you're working with textiles. Are you looking, now you're free, I guess, to use any medium that you want. Are there other mediums that you're looking to use or are using already? Thank you.
Yeah, so the first part of that, actually one of my professors from Millersville had stayed in contact with me over the duration of my 6-year sentence. And so she was incredibly instrumental in, like, when I'd send her work, she would send me reading materials and things to consider and think about and other artists and exhibitions happening in the world. And so that outside lifeline was really informative in terms of my thinking and my practice. And then the second part, I am like a material artist, and I find that my materials will often shift according to like what I'm thinking about creating, or sometimes I just come across a material that like just hits me, and like I respond to it in a way where I don't even know what I'm responding to, but I know I'm feeling something about this thing. And oftentimes I'll just begin collecting them or then researching them. And then I'll allow that process of making to actually dictate, or like not dictate, but help me learn what it is I'm responding to. And so I will use a very intuitive creative process in a lot of ways that then helps me in my internal reflection through reading different philosophers or texts or journal entries that that kind of revolve around that practice. And so even with like embroidery, that's not something that kind of came natural to me. It was just something that really started appealing to me. And I was like, well, why? Like, why am I really being attracted to this process of embroidery? And so I started buying books on embroidery and learning the whole history of embroidery and how it's used in contemporary practice. And it really helped refine, for me, it's that constant repetitive piercing of a fabric. It's literally confining a fabric. And so it's like this process that basically, the way I use it, you can eradicate pretty much everything around it, but like I just keep the embroidery which has this hidden fabric within it. And so for me, that was like the repetition, and that process kind of captured ideas of incarceration and time.
And I also was just talking today with some colleagues about the fact that historically embroidery was done often through child labor because they needed small hands to be able to make the fine stitches. So there is this interesting history to embroidery as well.
Yeah. And I think there's an entire history around this book that I'm reading where it talks about embroidery was primarily done by men.
Mm-hmm.
It was like a practice reserved for men and royalty. And that over time, it then became a woman's craft, and it wasn't a high art anymore, and how that was used to kind of then be a weapon against men to kind of emasculate them. And so like there's this entire like very rich history of how embroidery was even used to control people.
I think we have time for one more question.
Thank you so much for sharing. I actually teach incarcerated individuals in two maximum security prisons in New York, and the majority of my students are Black and brown. And I was wondering, I appreciated what you offered in terms of your art and your talent serving as a currency while inside. I'm wondering the ways in which you think perhaps your whiteness served as a currency in terms of being enveloped in the art world, right, and being seen, right, as an artist. If you could tap into that. Thank you.
Absolutely. I think in many ways, I fully recognize the space that I occupy, not just as being white, but also a man, and like how I move through the world is very different from other people. And I think the thing that was kind of really apparent to me when I first came home, I was getting invited to be in these exhibitions that were around ideas of incarceration, and I was always the only directly impacted artist included in these exhibitions. And I think that completely connects to the idea of being white and being seen as someone who is valuable and worthy of being included in these exhibitions, right? Whether it's like overt or whether it's subtle. And that really struck me, which is also one of the main reasons why me and Russell Craig, my friend, started the fellowship program, because it was like, in many ways, I should not be the face of art and incarceration. I just shouldn't. But I am. And there are ways that I function and move through the world because people receive me differently than they would receive someone else. And so I've also recognized that my job as a white person who has had that lived experience is to take these opportunities and then really try to open the door and use and leverage them for other people who are predominantly impacted by the system, for them to get these same opportunities. And I think that's like, again, that's kind of like what Apocalyptine is touching on. Like, even if you look at the imagery that's in that work, every single woman on that landscape is a skinny blonde woman, right? And like, it's just how our society is currently set up. And so it's like, how do I use the space that I occupy to actually call that into question and create space for other people?
All right. Well, I want to thank you all for joining us tonight, and I hope that you will come back and spend some time in the exhibition upstairs, and come back and see some of our programs. And with that, I want to thank Jesse, and I want to thank all of you.
Thank you.